Yo guys, welcome to RenderRam. In today's video we're gonna be talking about rendering speedups. I originally wanted this video to have 5 rendering tips, but I shortened it down to only 3 because I don't like long videos, so I'll see to have a part 2 of this video very soon. So let's jump into the render speedups. I have an example room, as you can see here. It's just plain walls with some sort of furniture in it, we have a window, etc. Now, one of the things that I use to speed up my render times, I try to define if my window glass is really important. Usually if you have a daylight scene that you need to render, you would normally have a glass on your windows. But the thing with glass, so glass is here to kind of see the reflection of the interior possibly or something like that. But if you kind of look closely, any window around you, and if on the other side, it's middle of the day, you're hardly gonna see any reflections. So the brighter the outside is, reflections are gonna be much less visible. Unless you have a night scene, then those reflections in the windows really kick in. But in this example, I have a daylight scene, so I have my window glass here, as you can see it here. Now, let me turn on the render. So our render is now done. I've used 1000 samples as my rendering point, and for 1000 samples we got nowhere near denoised image, but that's not important now. Render time is what is important. We have 3 minutes and 28 seconds to render this image. Now let me just port this to max frame buffer, and now I'm gonna hide the windows here. So if I click on hide and just do the render again, this is what happens. So our image is rendered now. We're sitting at 2 minutes and 48 seconds for 1000 samples. Before, we were at 3 minutes and 28 seconds. This is a massive render time decrease. Now, there are some differences in the scene, but let's check if they are really important. One of the main differences that you can see is, look at the amount of noise here. So you have this noise here in the old image, and look at that same noise here, it's much less pronounced. The image is much more clearer now. So not only that you decreased render times, you also cleared up a lot of noise. So theoretically, you didn't just get a faster render time, you actually got much clearer image. Let's take a look at some actual differences. So when you look through the window, you can see that in our no glass scene, these parts of the outside image are much more pronounced, where in this image they look much more paler. But what you can do, you can actually fake this. You remove the glass, you plug in some sort of color correction node to your bitmap of the background, and you just, crank the gamma or something like that, and your render times will be flying. Let's take another example here. So in this scene, we have curtains covering our whole windows. So we definitely don't need that glass on the windows. Now let's see what happens with our render times. So for this curtain, I have a pure white material with a bunch of translucency on it. Now let's see how that looks like. Alright, so we're sitting at 3 minutes 20 seconds and a super noisy image for our 1000 samples. Now let me port that image to max buffer as a reference. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna right click on my curtains, go to object properties, and turn off receive and cast shadow. Now, you can instantly notice the image is getting much brighter because the sun is completely ignoring the curtain as this blockage of its first ray hit. So at this point, we definitely need to lower our exposure in our image from 0.7 to 0.3. Okay, so we're here. The other problem that we have, you can see, since there is no translucency kind of blurring out all the shadows in our scene, you can see that we have a literal sunlight hitting without being blurry. So you gotta kind of think out of the box at this point. So what if I select my sunlight and just increase its size? Here I'm using F-Storm light. It can also be a sunlight. For our example, we're gonna get the same effect. If I increase the size of my light, let's say from 9 centimeters to 60 centimeters, we're gonna get much more softer shadows, and of course I need to decrease the sun intensity, something like this. Okay, so what is interesting at this point, I have paused the render at 3 minutes and 28 seconds. It was supposed to render all up until 4.5 minutes, but don't let that discourage you, because look at this. Our previous render was rendering 1000 samples to 3 minutes and 20 seconds. I'm at 3:28 now at 780 samples, but look at the difference at the same time frame. So if you take a closer look at the amount of noise that's already been cleared up. That is a clear indication of render speedup here. And if I decide to let my render all the way to 1000 samples, we're at 4 minutes and 16 seconds. When it comes to visual differences, you can notice a slight difference. So this is not something major, I would say. Curtains look very similar, one compared to another. When it comes to shadows, you can just tweak these to kind of match this look if you're aiming for that look with the size of your sun, but as a result, you will get a much cleaner image. Now for our next example, you always need to be very careful whenever you're importing objects in your scene, because some of these objects can be literal landmines. What do I mean by that? If, for example, you need to add in a bunch of props in your scene, you always need to monitor what is your render time. So let's say, for example, if your room is rendering for 30 minutes and you keep dropping in the props, well, logically your render time is going to be increasing, but you can expect some slight increases happening over time. But there might be an issue where a render time could jump tremendously high just because of one prop. And it's always good to know what is happening in your scene, what is causing the issue, so that you can eliminate the problem as soon as possible. So I'm rendering this scene now, and I'm also going to be rendering 1000 samples. So let's check out the render time that we have right now. So we have 2 minutes and 36 seconds for this whole room. And let's say the client wants to drop in, for example, some flour on this little table. You drag your flour, you download it from internet or somewhere, and this is the flour, and you hit render. Now look at this. Just because of this tiny little flour, to be precise, just this part increased our render times from 2 minutes and 36 seconds to 3 minutes and 38 seconds. This is a dramatical increase in render time. Just picture it on a bigger scale. Let's say that the image without this flour renders for about 1.5 hours, and then you drop it in, your render times are gonna jump to like 2 hours or 2 hours and 10 minutes or something like that, just because of this prop. And if you don't monitor what's happening in your scene, you will just scratch your head thinking, you know, like, what is the issue? Why is my render so slow? So the best way to kind of keep track on how to control your render times is to closely monitor the render time increase when you're dropping in the objects. Now, I'm gonna show you how I would solve this issue. So it doesn't necessarily mean you need to remove the object from the scene. So what I would do is I would render my scene without the flowers. So I would literally do this. So just render the whole scene without the flowers, and then once the image is fully rendered, I would just render this piece separately. So if I region just this part, this is gonna be rendered in like 20 seconds or something. So if we're talking on a larger scale, you got a render time increase of, let's say, half an hour just because of this flower. But if you keep an eye on it and you render it separately like this and just comp it in Photoshop, your render time is going to be a couple of minutes maybe just to render this one piece. So this is one of the ways to preserve the problematic objects in your scene without losing quality, but yet again, saving render time. And that's it for today, guys. I hope you learned something new in today's video. Keep your render times low and happy renderings. Bye!